24 million Canadians. That's how many people in this country use Facebook, 65% of the population. And today, Canada's Privacy Commissioner is warning those 24 million users Facebook is acting irresponsibly and could be violating your privacy. That's Daniel Therrien's conclusion following an investigation carried out with his BC counterpart. And based on those findings, they plan to take the social media network to court. The investigation was first launched when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, and millions of Facebook users around the world learned their data was obtained without their consent and used, in some cases, for political gain. Privacy watchdogs here say Facebook hasn't fully learned its lesson.
They say that they are accountable. We have seen in this instance that they were not accountable. And Canadians are at risk because the protections offered by Facebook are essentially empty.
So if Facebook broke the law, why hasn't the federal government taken any action against it? Karina Gould is the Minister of Democratic Institutions, and she joins us now from Burlington, Ontario. Hi, Minister Gould. Nice to see you again. Thanks for your time.
Hi, Vashi.
So Canada's Federal Privacy Commissioner and the BC Privacy Commissioner both found that Facebook breached Canadian privacy laws. They want to take Facebook to court over that breach. Is holding Facebook accountable up to those privacy commissioners and the courts, or is the federal government going to do something?
Well, thank you for the question, Vashi. Look, first of all, we welcome the report and the investigation by these privacy commissioners. I think that's very important for Canadians. And as the federal government, I think what we've come to realize is that there is scope for the federal government to act, and it's something that we're looking at across the government right now. So my colleague, Minister Baines, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, and I are looking at, kind of a whole of government approach as to ensuring that Canadians' privacy is trusted, that we're looking at this with a whole range of different issues when it comes to social media, when it comes to hate speech and extremist content online, when it comes to protecting our democracy. There's a lot of work that's going on across government right now.
Can you be more specific? You told The Star not long ago that you were, quote, actively considering regulating these social media companies. Is that true, and what do you mean by that?
So I think where we are right now as a government is that we understand that the time of self-regulation is coming to an end. Governments around the world, are kind of realizing and understanding, as are citizens around the world, as to how, these social media companies, these digital platforms have been using data and how they have also been manipulated by malicious actors. And there's kind of a global moment right now as to many of the different like-minded countries looking at how we can make sure that, the values and the standards that we've had for so long when it comes to our media and our interactions as people are also reflected in the digital space, while still ensuring, internet freedom and, the importance of being able to act freely on the internet. So it's a complex issue, but we're getting down to a place where we're looking at what those tools are that we have in the toolbox and how we can apply those across the country.
So let me ask you about a specific tool brought up by both privacy commissioners when they gave their press conference earlier today. They're calling for the ability to have actually strong and stronger sanctioning powers at their level. Like, they should be able, they think, to sanction these companies. Is that something your government will provide them?
It's something that we're looking at for sure. And I think one of the things that is noteworthy is that we do have many really important offices and really important commissions in Canada that can be perhaps used when it comes to how social media might be regulated in Canada. What we're trying to do is looking at that evidence and understand where this might best be placed. One example that I can point to that I think is interesting, and one that we're looking at here in Canada, is the white paper that was released by the United Kingdom just a couple of weeks ago, where they're talking about actually creating a new regulator specifically with regards to social media. Right now, all options are on the table. I think what is important to note is that this is a space where government now sees that we do need to act. We're just trying to figure out the way that we can do it that's best for Canadians in achieving our objectives, making sure that all of their rights and freedoms are respected, and that we can continue to enjoy the benefits that social media platforms have brought on while trying to mitigate some of the risks.
Will those actions be taken prior to the next election?
I think that what we can do prior to the next election is really set the stage for where Canada can go in the coming months and years. And I think that's really important, is to signal what the government of Canada is intending to do and what can be done. That being said, I am still having conversations with all of the social media platforms with regards to our upcoming election in terms of what we expect of them and how we expect them to act in the coming months.
I guess why I asked, though, about a timeline is because I understand you're saying you're going to signal what you intend to do. But, you know, these powers, for example, that the Privacy Commissioner is asking for, they've been asking for a while, obviously underscored by what happened with this. They might apply even to the next election, right? So are you saying then basically that there, for example, would be no new legislation or regulation introduced prior to the end of this sitting?
Well, I don't want to say what could or could happen between then, because, you know, we're actively looking at this right now. I can say that we will have more to say in the coming weeks. But what I do think is important is this recognition that, you know, the time of self-regulation for the social media companies here in Canada, but also around the world, is something that, you know, as societies we're realizing is really not possible, and it's time for governments to step in. And it's also important for us to understand and to think about, you know, very thoughtfully how we do this, because we want to do it in a way that, as I said, enables Canadians to continue to benefit from, you know, the social good that has come from, you know, being able to engage with friends and family in ways that weren't possible before, in ways to share information and learn that is really productive, to take advantage of the economic benefits, but also to address some of the challenges that have been posed. And so we're really looking at this from a really broad societal perspective to try and understand everything and have a good plan moving forward that achieves our objectives.
Do you think, Minister, that your government is late coming to the conclusion that the era of self-regulation is over? And I ask because you referred to that white paper. The UK has already thought it out, released it. They fined Facebook £500,000 back in October of 2018 for failing to protect user data in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. The US, for example, Facebook said yesterday that it expects to be fined up to $3 billion by the Federal Trade Commission in that country. Is the federal government in this country, your government, too late to the game, too late to figuring out that this era of self-regulation is in fact over?
I don't think so, and I would point back to C-76, the Elections Modernization Act that received royal assent in December. That was actually one of the first times anywhere in the world that we have regulated social media platforms when it comes to elections, and that's something that's important. Canada has been a leader around the world, and we are engaging with our like-minded partners both in Europe and in the Americas and in the Five Eyes as well. And so we are actively part of these conversations that are ongoing, and we're looking forward to have more to say in the coming weeks on this particular topic.
Weren't you yourself, though, when a few weeks ago talking about how those social media companies in the context of C-76 were not quite as agreeable, or the conversations were not happening the way that you thought that or hoped that they would?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that or dispute that. I mean,
does that mean that legislation lacks teeth?
We need to see more. No, because with regards to C-76, they all said that they're going to comply with it. That's just how they're going to comply is different. But what I was talking about was beyond the legislation. So everyone is going to comply with the legislation. It's the additional asks and the additional conversations that we've had with how they can actually just change the activity and their behavior on their platforms, internal decisions that they can make that I'm not satisfied with, and that those conversations are ongoing. However, I would say that we continue to have a dialogue with each of the major platforms. And while, you know, I'm not satisfied or happy with the outcome as of yet, I'm still hopeful that we can get to a better position, because I do believe that Canadians deserve that, and I think that they need to be respectful of Canadians in the upcoming election.
Are you yourself comfortable using Facebook? Do you trust the company to protect your information?
Well, I would say that I'm very mindful of how each of the companies use my data. By the nature of the work that I've done over the past 2.5 years, I'm very aware of how data is used by those platforms. And I think one of the really important things about today's report and the statements by the privacy commissioners is hopefully it will further expand the conversation that Canadians are having about data, about privacy, and about what they expect of companies and what they expect of governments as well in terms of how we interact. So I think this is all really positive, because one of the things that I think about a lot is how Canadians give a lot of their data away and they don't necessarily know how it's being used. And so I think this is a really important conversation that we need to be having across the country.
I guess I wonder, though, what message it sends Canadians that if their data is breached, the consequence is the potential of going to court, that there's no actual immediate consequence for these companies because privacy commissioners, for example, are just not enabled with that capacity.
Well, so again, this is a really important conversation that we're having, and I think it's something that is good for Canadians to be talking about. It's something that we're actively looking at, and one of the things that we understand as a government is the importance of trust between users and the platforms. Users have been voicing more concerns towards the platforms. We expect those concerns to be taken seriously, but we are now looking at that as a government to figure out exactly how we can assure that trust with users and that their data can be protected.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Minister. Appreciate your time today.
Great, thank you for having me.
That was the Minister of Democratic Institutions speaking earlier on our show, responding to an unsettling report. Canada's privacy watchdog found Facebook broke a number of Canada's privacy laws, and he wants to take the social media giant to court over it. Daniel Terrien launched the investigation with his BC counterpart after the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke. In 2017, millions of Facebook users learned their data was obtained without their consent and used for political gain. That's what that Cambridge Analytica scandal was all about. So are Canadians who use Facebook still at risk? Daniel Terrien is the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and Michael McAvoy is the Information and Privacy Commissioner for BC. Both join me in studio right now. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for coming in and making time for us. I appreciate it. Mr. Terrien, let me start with you. Can you help lay out in layman's terms for Canadians exactly what you found?
I think it's useful to come back to the facts as they were revealed more than a year ago by British newspapers. So essentially, the facts are that Facebook did not adequately protect the personal information of their users, such that people who use that information, a third-party application and an analytics company, called Cambridge Analytica, were then able to use that to profile people and send political messages to electors, particularly in the United States. So there's a link between lack of protection by Facebook to use by analytics companies to attempts to influence elections. What we did, Mr. McAvoy and I, was to look at the Facebook terms and conditions which made this possible and the impact that might have on Canadians. And what we found at the end of the day was that the privacy conditions or framework that Facebook had, we found was an empty shell, did not adequately protect Canadians or others.
As it stands right now.
As it stands right now. We did not find that the information of Canadians was used to target them politically, but the same terms and conditions that led to political targeting in the US are applicable to Canadians. Therefore, Canadians are at the same risk. The risk did not manifest itself, so we found, but it could manifest itself in the future.
Okay, let me pick up on that point because Facebook, Mr. McAvoy, released a statement today in response to the findings of both your offices and said, I want to read it verbatim. After many months of good faith cooperation and lengthy negotiations, we're disappointed that the OPC considers the issues raised in this report unresolved. There's no evidence, they write, that Canadians' data was shared with Cambridge Analytica, and we've made dramatic improvements to our platform to protect people's personal information. So let's start with the part where they say there's no evidence that this was actually, that the data was nefariously used.
Well, we do know that the data escaped from Facebook. It made its way into the hands of Dr. Alexander Kogan. Millions of names were vacuumed up, including the information of 660,000 Canadians. So clearly that is a significant breach on Facebook's part. The fact, or not, it's not a fact, for Facebook to deny that Cambridge Analytica used that, they could provide us no evidence to support that conclusion. What we do know, again, is that the information left Facebook's purview, and it ought not to have. And Facebook has acknowledged that that is an issue and a problem.
So if you're one of those more than 600,000 Canadians, just to be clear, you're saying that it left the purview of Facebook, but we don't know for sure what happened with it. They're saying, well, we have no evidence that it went to Cambridge Analytica.
Well, again, we know that in the Cambridge Analytica matter, it led to political targeting in the US. The same legal environment existed for Canadian users. We did not find evidence that this information was used in Canadian elections, but the legal landscape is the same. The absence of privacy protection is the same, and therefore the risk could manifest itself for Canadians. Moreover, our investigation did not only look at the Facebook Colgan Cambridge Analytica issue. It looked at Facebook's terms and conditions as it applies to all third-party applications, and there are millions of these applications. So the lack of protection given by Facebook to its users could lead to similar leaks, probably leads to similar leaks through many, many other applications.
Do you think there's anything right now in place, Mr. McAvoy, to prevent the same type of electorally related targeting or use of Canadians' data from happening in the next federal election?
I think the most troubling thing about this is that it could happen in Canada without any possibility of adequate sanctions on a company like Facebook were there walls to be breached again. That's a significant problem in this country, federally, but also provincially.
How different is that from other jurisdictions?
Quite dissimilar. For example, to Europe, where they have the General Data Protection Regulation, very strict regulation around and ask for very stringent consent around the use of data, followed up by very significant fining power if those consent obligations are breached. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission, which has some power over the privacy issue, is in discussions with Facebook about a potential fine. Facebook put aside $3 to $5 billion yesterday, in which they say they may be the subject of a fine. So those are serious sanctions, and these are the kind of sanctions that legislators in Canada need to look at in order to properly protect the privacy of Canadians.
We had Minister Gould on the show earlier, Mr. Therrien, and I asked her specifically about what you had both requested, which is the power to sanction these companies. She said that everything is on the table, it's being considered, would not commit to any kind of date or timeline to implementing these. What is your assessment of how the federal government has responded so far?
I've said before that I think the federal government has been very slow to act. It has not acted legislatively up to this point, even though I think we've seen similar issues for years now. I think there is not enough time in the current Parliament for this to lead to a bill, but my sincere hope is that early in the new Parliament, Parliament will give this priority. We see some signs that the current government is responding to parliamentary committees, acknowledges that legislation needs to be improved. I clearly would have liked legislation to have been adopted already, but again, my hope is that early in the new Parliament this will happen.
I was saying to both of you before we started the interview that I feel like I've done the interview many times where you're saying that and the federal government is saying everything's on the table. What do you think is behind the hesitancy to act more concretely, Mr. McAvoy?
That's a very good question. I mean, politicians react to public demands and public sentiment, and I think on this issue, public sentiment is shifting. I think the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal was something that had seismic implications across the globe, where you're seeing legislation tighten in various countries. Even the United States is looking at broader privacy regulations. So I think with the shift in public opinion, hopefully that will push elected representatives along the same line to ensure that Canadians are properly protected.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. But thank you very much to both of you for your time today. Thanks to Daniel Therrien, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and Michael McAvoy, BC's Information and Privacy Commissioner.
Thank you.
You're welcome.